often catch myself getting lost in these quiet evenings, looking up at the starry canopy, feeling the weight of questions that have pursued thinkers for millennia. What drives us to seek the universe's first breath, that elusive instant when everything that exists emerged from what? I think the question gazes back like a still pond, asking not only about origins, but about departures, how anything arrives, lingers, and then releases itself into the wider dark. When I picture Three-Eye Atlas nearing Earth this December and then slipping away, I see time as a fabric tugged gently by a passing thread, the weave tightening for a moment and then relaxing, a memory of motion left in the cloth. And I wonder, what does it mean to leave in a place with no walls, where boundaries blur like chalk and mist, and distance is only a softening of presence? There is a night soon when our world and this interstellar traveler perform a respectful crossing, close in the language of orbits, far in the language of hands. I think that closeness matters less as proximity and more as permission to revise our maps of beginnings and endings. The near point becomes a parable about attention. Do we rush to take a snapshot, or do we let the sight rearrange our sense of home? A passerby on a highway can change how a town imagines roads. A passerby in the sky can change how a species imagines belonging. After all, the sky is not a ceiling but a well, and we draw meaning from it with the bucket of patience. But thinking more deeply, I realize how easily we name one side arrival and the other departure because we insist on centering ourselves, our star, our planet, our calendars. I think the comet offers a gentler grammar. Home is not a fixed dot, but a tapestry woven from moments of passing through. We are not the anchor of the narrative. We are a lantern lit in on a long road, a place where the wind pauses to speak. Does that humble us or free us? Perhaps both, like a tide that erases footprints and at the same time invites new walkers to write their brief stories in the damp sand. Plato's cave flickers in this thought. A distant lantern casts stranger shadows than a nearby fire, and visitors from afar distort our expectations just enough to loosen the chains of habit. I think wonder and skepticism must sit side by side on the cave floor. If skepticism stands alone, the stars go silent. If wonder stands alone, the ground slips away. The traveler makes a request of us. Hold a question in one hand and a breath in the other, and see if the night grows wider. There's also the rhythm that some call the eternal return, not the literal repetition of a single stone, but the pattern of appearing and vanishing that keeps time for sentient life. I think everything that moves through us, ideas, seasons, friendships, teaches the same dance step: approach, presence, release. On scales we can barely imagine, Three-Eye Atlas is only one drumbeat among many, yet it sets our feet moving. Loneliness then becomes a misunderstanding of tempo. What feels like absence may be the rest between notes. When I turn the idea of origins in my hands, old images glimmer. There is the story of a boundary so tight that all paths fold into one, a point beyond which our language frays. And there is the counter story of resilience, a hidden spring in the mattress of existence where compression leads not to finality but to rebound. I think of our visitor cresting near its solar turning and then lifting outward again, a small echo of that spring. Not a theory, just a human-scaled picture. Inhale, exhale, approach, retreat. Music that modulates but does not end. If worlds are membranes floating in a deeper expanse, I sometimes imagine our solar system as a knot in a wind-blown flag, A traveler like this could be a seed carried across ripples, a letter slid under the door from another room. Does it bring messages from unfamiliar hearths? I think the message is written in ice and dust, in the dialect of sunlight, in the grammar of how a tale forms and fades. We read with telescopes like fingertips on braille, searching for raised meanings that whisper, there are other kitchens warming bread in the morning. Entropy drifts through all of this like a patient teacher. Things spill, patterns relax, attention wanders unless invited to stay. I think the comet leaves because leaving is the path of least resistance, the slope of the universe's floor. Yet precisely because the slope is there, purpose becomes the art of climbing anyway, of choosing to witness, to record, to share, to refine our instruments and our hearts. Maybe the cosmos doesn't care that we care, but caring reshapes the cosmos inside us, and that reshaping matters. Here the anthropic thought knocks softly. We are here because the conditions allow for questions that persist long enough to breed more questions. I picture a midnight kitchen where a pot simmers. The aroma wakes the house. Existence is that aroma. We rise, descend the stairs of curiosity, and lift the lid. Steam fogs the window. The street lamp outside becomes a tiny sun. In that blur, I think I see our task, to keep the pot from boiling dry, to invite others to taste, to write the recipe so even strangers can cook this wonder for themselves. Ethics, then, is not an appendix to astronomy, but its steady heartbeat. A visitor stirs the public imagination, and we owe it a careful honesty. Resist turning uncertainty into spectacle. Keep the shutters of inquiry oiled and quiet. Share the eyepiece. Responsibility in a vast neighborhood is like carrying a candle through a crowded gallery. Illuminate without scorching. Reveal without blinding. Leave no wax on the floor. The comet will not change its path for our courtesy, but we will change our path by practicing it. And to those playful whispers about simulation, I say, perhaps. If so, it feels like a world that learns from the questions we ask. A surprise visitor could be an invitation in the code. Try curiosity. I think responding well upgrades the next scene. Whether rendered or real, the night still cools the skin, and a pale streak still tugs at the human wish to name and narrate. If there are patch notes, they might read, introduced interstellar guest to broaden local sense of home. As December's geometry arranges its modest nearness, people gather before dawn in parks and on rooftops. Tripods unfold like metal reeds, breath plumes in the cold little nebulae that vanish at once. A child asks if the traveler will ever return. The wisest answer is both simple and brave. Not to us, but others will. I think that promise is the true center of the story. The calendar of the sky is inexhaustible, provided we protect the dark that lets faint messengers speak. Leaving is part of hospitality. We honor the guest by letting it go with clean records, honest light curves, careful sketches of the way its glow softened and the way it taught our instruments to listen better. We keep the door unlatched for the next knock. We tend the garden of our readiness, alignment, calibration, patience, virtues as much as procedures. Vacuum to me is not emptiness but a sea just below boiling, a hush humming with tiny storms. Our visitor is a schooner, crossing swells too small for our eyes, but real enough to rock the hull of imagination. This picture steadies me. Calm surfaces can hold much motion. Quiet nights can hold reckonings. A blue planet can hold meanings larger than itself. When the traveler sails on, the sea keeps its whisper and we keep our listening. Somewhere around mid-December, rails part like lines in a palm. two trains shine across a valley close enough to notice, too far to wave with certainty. There is melancholy in that encounter without meeting, but also a liberation because meaning does not require touch. Witness can suffice. Civilization might be this long practice of forming friendships with the far, the future, the past, the unlikely, the interstellar. Duty returns like a gentle tide. Do not squander the sky. Do not weaponize wonder. Share the telescope. Leave room for surprise. A signature dries on the parchment of the season, and we become more ourselves because we were present for the flourish. And if beneath all of it the old boundary of beginnings softens into resilience, if the universe carries a hidden spring, then every departure is a modulation rather than an ending. The music continues. We lean forward. There is more to come. There is always more. I think the second movement of this reflection needs a slower pulse, a longer breath, like walking further down a moonlit road just to hear the gravel think underfoot. December's almost nearness is still ahead, but the mind already rehearses the farewell, testing what it means to witness something that does not belong to us and never will. There's a tenderness in that stance, a humility that does not sag but stands upright, as if saying, gratitude can be a spine. But thinking more deeply, the idea of belonging itself loosens. Does the sky belong to anyone? Or do we belong to the sky in the way a shore belongs to the sea, given contour by the very waters that will forever try to smooth it away? I think belonging is a verb here. To belong is to be shaped by, to be answerable to be alert for. The visitor shapes us by demanding attention without granting possession, by asking for our best instruments and then refusing our attempt to claim authorship over its story. That refusal is a gift, the kind that keeps our language honest. Time in these late-night musings feels like a fabric not merely stretched, but embroidered by intention. We sew meaning into it, stitch by stitch, and the pattern becomes legible only after many evenings of patient threading. The comet is a bright bead the needle passes through once, and then the thread goes on. I think that is why the near pass aches a little. We recognize ourselves in the one time only. Our best days are not repeatable either, and yet they illuminate the road for days that follow. The ache is not a wound. It is a lantern. There is a temptation to make this guest into a metaphor for everything, for hope, for exile, for the dignity of distance. I think metaphors are fine so long as they remain bridges, not cages. Let the traveler cross into our inner life, yes, but do not lock it in a moral we tailor to our mood. Better to let it teach by absence as much as by presence, to let the darkness between observations speak. In that silence, I hear an ethic humming. Protect nights, cultivate patience, trade spectacle for fidelity. The world is already miraculous. It doesn't need adornment so much as attention. But considering more deeply, the human creature craves a place in a larger story, and stories have beginnings. We keep returning to the old doorway, the moment when the curtain rose for the first time, when the stage lights found their courage. If there was once a boundary so tight we named it a singularity, perhaps the name was a confession, an admission that language hit its shoreline. And yet, I think of resilience as a counterweight. Maybe the curtain didn't appear from nowhere, but from a hidden hinge, a spring that had been gathering possibility, a bounce that turned compression into music. When 3i Atlas rounds its near point and lifts away, I feel that hinge at work, that spring's gentleness. Approach and release are not opposites. They are syllables of one word we can't quite pronounce. Then there's the thought of wide rooms, the possibility that our universe is only one chamber in a mansion of rooms, each with its own draft, its own wooden floor creaking with age. If brains are membranes, perhaps they brush in invisible halls, exchanging scuffs and dust. A traveler could carry the faint scent of another room, smoke from a different fireplace, spices from a kitchen we haven't found. I think that's why the imagination leans forward, because the nose detects what the eyes cannot. We follow aromas through corridors of inference, and sometimes, with luck, we find a door ajar. Entropy remains the housekeeper of the mansion, tidy in reverse, always putting things out of place, always reminding us that order is an investment with ongoing costs. It would be easy to sigh and surrender to the slow unbraiding. But the more generous path is to volunteer for maintenance. We can be the kind of tenants who oil the hinges, mend the torn screen, label the drawers. In cosmic terms, that means archiving raw data, preserving dark skies, mentoring newcomers, and telling the truth even when the truth is a shrug. We don't know yet. I think that kind of stewardship is the most romantic thing about science. More romantic even than discovery, because it keeps the house hospitable for guests we cannot yet name. Sometimes the mind wanders to that playful suspicion. What if all this is a rendered stage, a simulation that spins textures only when we look? I think the idea is less a verdict than a dare. Will you behave as if the world deserves care, even if it could be code? The ethical wager is the same. If there are lines of logic beneath the grass, watering still matters, gardens still bloom, bees still trace their little equations in the air. Besides, a simulated comet that elicits real awe has already punctured the border between virtual and true. Awe is a currency that spends anywhere. And then the anthropic whisper, we find ourselves in a place where minds can arise because only such places are observed by minds. It sounds circular until one realizes that circles are steadying shapes. I think the circle becomes a compass if we etch north into it, curiosity as the needle. Under that guidance, the near pass of Three-Eye Atlas becomes a chapter in a longer travelogue, one planet's incremental vow to keep learning. Vows require ritual. Let ours be the quiet pre-dawn, the thermos steaming in the glove compartment, the boots whispering on frost, the tripod legs sinking into soil that remembers other winters. Closer to the heart, there's the loneliness we rarely admit, how, even in crowded cities, under neon skies, people feel like untethered satellites. A faint interstellar smear gives that loneliness a form, and suddenly it's bearable. Look, we say, something else is passing through. The miracle is that looking together mends us. Community is a telescope that requires many hands to aim. I think the best role for media in such seasons is to be a gentle host, to guide without hype, to teach without scolding, to pair wonder with context like bread with soup. Leaving will come as all guests leave. The art is to build a memory that does not fade into kitsch. Let the souvenir be the discipline of readiness, not the t-shirt of novelty. Keep the ephemeris, yes, but more importantly, keep the habit of stepping outside. Keep the patience that learns to see faint things. Keep the humility that lets uncertainty be luminous. When the traveler is gone, these remain like coals under ash, ready to answer the next breath. I think of vacuum again as a sea just shy of a boil, little uprisings forever. Beginning and subsiding, in that restlessness there is comfort. Even when the surface looks empty, the world is working. Even when the sky looks blank, stories are approaching from beyond the rim. This helps on difficult days. It means a quiet evening is not a failure of drama, but the stagehands preparing a scene. It means resting is not idling, it is listening for cues. December will teach this quietly. The geometry will do its modest work, the path will bend and then straighten like a sentence finding its period. No fanfare is necessary. The music will resolve without symbols, and the audience, the small, warm-breathed audience on this blue world, will feel something close to gratitude, not triumph, not conquest, simply the soft relief of having been present when a traveler traced a luminous note across the staff of the sky. I think that relief is the beginning of wisdom. It tells us that meaning is not seized but received, not owned but held, not hoarded but shared. Like a thermos cup passed from hand to hand on a cold morning, while the horizon thinks about light. I think the next stretch of thought should risk a longer horizon, like walking beyond the last street lamp and trusting the gravel to keep speaking. The near pass is the hinge, yes, but the door it swings opens onto a room full of quieter questions. What do we owe to what we cannot keep? And what do we become when we practice that owing? A visitor that never meant to stay still trains our character more than our technology. It asks us to polish patience, to steady attention, to distinguish reverence from possession. These are old virtues wearing new stardust. But thinking more deeply, the word away begins to dissolve. When something leaves our proximity, does it truly go away, or does it relocate into a subtler province of experience, memory, language, ritual? I think the human gift is to turn distance into meaning. A grandmother's recipe breathes through a kitchen decades after her hands have stopped stirring. A comet's faint trace breathes through the habits of a community that now checks the sky before dawn. We become caretakers of absences, and in that caretaking, we are not emptied but enlarged. The mind returns to the image of time as fabric, yet now the fabric seems interlined with intention, our stitches holding certain folds so that patterns remain visible. The interstellar traveler is a bright bead we will not thread again, but the hole it leaves in the cloth is not a wound. It is an aperture. Through it we glimpse something like the backstage of being, where props are simpler, light, gravity, dust, and meanings are sturdier because they have fewer moving parts. I think that is why even a small, faint smear in the sky can feel like a door ajar in the heart. Consider the cave again. Perhaps the lesson is not to flee the shadows, but to learn their grammar, to understand how light writes with absence. A comet teaches that eloquence. It speaks in the dialect of faintness, where every syllable is earned by patience. When people gather to look, they become each other's translators. Someone gasps and points, and the others recalibrate their eyes, and the smear emerges from the noise. Translation is a moral act as much as a perceptual one. It says, let's share reality carefully. I think ethics grows from such moments like moss grows from quiet stones. The rules are simple and supple. Protect darkness so that faint voices can be heard. Resist the drumbeat of spectacle when wonder whispers. Write down what you see without bending it to a story that flatters your tribe. These are not ascetic demands. They are invitations to hospitality. A sky made hospitable to interstellar guests becomes, by the same labor, hospitable to our neighbors who have never really looked up before. But considering more deeply, the grand narratives return and insist on a seat at the table. The old boundary we called the first moment presses like a finger on the page, and the alternative of resilience, bounce, cycle, turning, lays another page atop it. Which is truer? Perhaps the better question is, which helps us live more beautifully with what we don't know? I think resilience does. It suggests that even at limits there is give, that compression carries the seed of release, that endings can cradle beginnings, the way winter cradles spring bulbs. In December, when breath curls white and the comet tips its hat and recedes, we will feel that promise in our lungs. The mansion metaphor widens. If there are many rooms, many flags rippling on unseen winds, then our task is to be good neighbors in a building whose corridors we barely understand. A traveler might carry scuffs from another hallway. We should learn to read scuffs. That means learning to read without greed, to be satisfied with inference where direct touch is impossible, to accept that humility is a form of intelligence. I think the universe opens more doors to the gentle than to the clever. Entropy, faithful housekeeper that she is, keeps reminding us to tidy as we go. Data stray, instruments drift, memories blur. The answer is the same as in any household: routine. Sharpen the pencils, label the bins, back up the files, replace the cracked lens cap. A culture that respects slow maintenance will always be richer in wonder than a culture that respects only breakthrough. Breakthroughs are feasts, maintenance is bread. People cannot live on feasts. Sometimes on sleepless nights, the simulation thought taps at the window like a twig in wind. Suppose it's all rendered, what then? I think the only reasonable reply is to behave as if meaning is real, because behaving that way makes meaning real in the only place that matters, within and between us. If the code watches, let it see kindness. If the code learns, let it learn stewardship. If the code cracks a smile, let it be, because we chose curiosity over fear. The anthropic whisper tightens into advice. Be the kind of observers worth the conditions that allow you to exist. This is not grandiosity, but gratitude in action. It looks like scheduling public star parties, like translating jargon into kitchen table language, like designing lesson plans that treat awe as prior knowledge rather than extra credit. It looks like waking a child gently at 4 a.m. to show them a faint thing and telling them that faint things can be the most faithful friends. And when the geometry finally completes its sentence, when near becomes was near, the heart will know what to do. It will not collapse. It will stretch. It will not hoard. It will share. It will carry forward a set of small, sturdy vows. Step outside more often. Let slow things be slow. Be precise without being cold. Be warm without being vague. The traveler will be gone from the eyes but present in the gate, because the way we walk afterward is part of what it left us. So the road goes on beyond the last street lamp, and we go with it, not because we are brave, but because curiosity makes good company. The gravel keeps thinking underfoot. The sky keeps its counsel, but not its secrets. And on some future night, another messenger will lean into our valley, and we will be ready with flasks and notes and kindness. I think that readiness is the finest art a small planet can practice. I think this is where the road lengthens and the voice slows, not out of weariness, but out of respect for the distance ahead. December's geometry is still a promise on the horizon, and promises are best honored by the habits that prepare us for them. The habit here is lingering, letting thoughts steep until they darken, letting metaphors ripen without bruising them into slogans. A traveler approaches, and our minds rehearse the farewell, not to hasten it, but to become the kind of hosts who can bless a guest at the door with a steady hand. But thinking more deeply, the door itself deserves attention. The near pass is a hinge between seeing and remembering, and hinges are small, almost invisible, yet everything turns on them. I think a culture reveals itself in how it treats hinges, the quiet points on which grand motions depend. We can smear them with impatience until they squeal, or we can oil them with care until the turning becomes nearly musical. That oil is made of unglamorous ingredients: humility, accuracy, patience, sharing. The music is made of something older: wonder meeting truth and recognizing a relative. Time's fabric returns as an image, but tonight it feels layered, like a quilt pieced by many hands across decades. Three-Eye Atlas is one panel, stitched from cold threads and fastened with knots of attention. The quilt warms more than the single panel ever could, not because the panel is less, but because meaning accrues in company. I think this is the great consolation, that no solitary night bears the whole weight of significance. Even a clouded vigil joins the quilt as a dark square that sets off the bright ones, a necessary contrast in the pattern we only see when we step back. I keep asking what we owe to what we cannot keep, and the answer keeps returning in small verbs: protect, record, teach, invite. These are not dramatic words, but they are load-bearing. A civilization that lifts them daily builds cathedrals of attention without quarrying a single stone. That is the kind of grandeur worth chasing, the kind that doesn't crush, the kind that leaves wildflowers standing. I think Three-Eye Atlas invites exactly that, not a conquest of the sky, but a tenderness toward it. But considering more deeply, tenderness is not softness. It is precision with warmth. It counts the seconds and holds the silence. It names the faintness honestly and refuses to forge certainty from hunger. It loves the world enough to say, "not yet," to its own narratives, and maybe with a voice that does not sag into indifference. This is difficult art, and the reward is not applause, but a steadier self. The steadier self, in turn, notices more, and noticing is the cradle of wisdom. The large frameworks always return as constellations for the mind. The boundary once called first moment gleams like a cold star. The resilience of bounce glows warmer like a hearth. The many-roomed mansion of brains and corridors opens in imagination as an endless gallery where drafts carry hints from unseen wings. The frothy sea of forever birthing bubbles murmurs from far rooms, promising that novelty is not a local quirk, but a universal custom. And somewhere, the rumor of simulation laughs softly, not to mock us, but to remind us that meaning thrives under many roofs, whether logic gates or galaxies. I think the task is to walk these halls with good manners. Ask before touching. Read the placards. Speak quietly in the presence of old questions. Entropy pads through like a cat, aloof and attentive. It will undo our care in time, but not contemptuously, more like weather than will. We need not resent it. We can respond with rhythms. Back up and breathe, calibrate and rest, archive and wander. The partnership works. Disorder gains on us, and we gain on understanding. And the sum is a humane life. If we do this well, the world we hand forward will be more hospitable to the next traveler and to the next generation watching for it. Then there is the human interior, how all of this touches the secret rooms where people keep their private storms. I think a faint visitor helps with grief. It teaches how to love what goes. It teaches the craft of farewell without drama, the long exhale, the quiet thank you, the confidence that absence can still participate in our days. When the comet dwindles to rumor, the practice remains. Step outside, befriend the night, call someone to share the view. Be specific about beauty. Specificity is mercy, because it prevents wonder from dissolving into vague sentiment. The quiet ethics of attention scales beautifully. A rooftop gathering becomes a neighborhood tradition. A neighborhood tradition becomes a city that dims unnecessary lights. A city becomes a model. Small verbs again. Protect, record, teach, invite. None of these requires permission from the stars, only consent among ourselves. I think cosmic awe is most truthful when it flowers into local kindness. After looking up, we look around, and our hands find tasks waiting patiently. A railing to fix, a porch to sweep, a friend to text at dawn because the sky was unbelievable and you wanted them to be part of the sentence. Soon, the geometry will finish its soft choreography. Near will pass into was, and was will become a story told better with each telling, not because we embellish, but because we remove the parts that never belonged. Refinement is love at work. We keep the subtle curve of the path, the flavor of frost in the breath, the whisper of tripods on soil, the sudden hush when the smear first declared itself. We keep the discipline that sees the world freshly without always needing it to be new. And then the future leans in a little. Another messenger is already on a road we cannot see. Preparing for it becomes a style of life rather than a calendar entry. A style of life in which curiosity is housekeeping, not holiday. In which care is the baseline, not the crescendo. In which departures are blessings because they make room in us. I think that style is within reach. It starts with checking the weather, charging the batteries, setting the alarm, and leaving enough space in the heart for both surprise and restraint. So, yes, more words, more symbols, in the service of a silence we are learning to hear. The night is not empty, it is considerate. It waits for us to be ready. And when we are, it speaks in the dialect of faint things that travel far and ask for so little. A dark place, an attentive eye, a willingness to be changed without ownership. Under such terms, we become trustworthy narrators of our small corner of a large home. And that, I think, is a beautiful way to live, while the hinge of December swings and the door of the sky opens just enough for a traveler to pass through and teach us how to welcome the next. I think we're now walking in that hour when the night feels taller, as if the stars had quietly adjusted the ceiling while no one was looking. December's hinge draws nearer, and the feeling is less like a countdown than like a page almost ready to be turned. There's a dignity to not rushing the page. The ink needs to dry. The hand needs to rest. The eyes need a pause to hold what they've just read, so the next line can find its footing in a mind that is listening rather than merely scanning. But thinking more deeply, listening is a moral act and the sky rewards it. Faintness is a teacher of character. You must lower your voice, steady your breathing, let your pupils widen, and give your eyes time to learn what they're looking at. In a loud world, this is countercultural. Yet this counterculture is gentle. It does not rage. It persists. The comet's lesson is whispered, and still it reaches crowds because the whisper passes from one person to another with a tenderness that shouts can't carry. Time's fabric again. Tonight it doesn't stretch so much as ripple, like wind moving over a field of tall grass. The ripple is the information that something passed. No need to see the traveler directly when the pattern goes dark, light dark, in a motion that tells a story. I think a lot of truth comes to us this way, sideways, through changes at the margins, through the way silence becomes articulate if you learn its inflections. The near pass will be partly that, a change in the texture of attention. Nights afterward will feel different because we have learned to detect subtler breezes. There's a quiet bravery in building a culture around such subtleties. It means choosing practices that will never generate headlines, yet will always generate trust. Releasing data with notes that admit uncertainty. Teaching kids to love the sky enough to leave it unspoiled. Inviting neighbors to viewings that are as much about community as about photons. I think of it as civic astronomy, governance by awe. When people share a faint thing honestly, they are rehearsing democracy at its best, patient, accurate, kind. But considering more deeply, longing keeps slipping into the room, asking if the visitor could stay a little longer, be a little brighter, reveal a little more. Longing is not a flaw. It's the warmth of the seat we offer. Yet longing needs a companion. Restraint. Without restraint, longing burns the tablecloth. With restraint, longing becomes a hearth. The balance is delicate, like adjusting focus on a cold night with gloves on. Small motions, steady breath, a willingness to stop before the image trembles. The grand frameworks continue to anchor the mind without chaining it. The old boundary glows at the edge of thought, a star you never center because it disappears when stared at directly. Resilience answers with its soft yes. The promise that compression will not be cruelty but choreography. The many rooms and rippling membranes suggest that our guest's story began under other chandeliers, in other stairwells where dust motes danced in a foreign light. The frothy sea of bubbles implies that novelty is abundant, that meaning will never run dry if we carry the right cups. And even the rumor of simulation plays its part, prodding us to act as if kindness is compiled into the logic of things, whether or not there is a compiler. Entropy pads by with her soft feet, effortlessly misplacing our best intentions. The antidote remains rhythm. Charge, check, clean, calibrate, confirm. Also rest. Rest is not a luxury added to the work. Rest is the seam that keeps the garment from splitting. A tired observer invents a brighter comet than the sky provides. A rested one tells the truth, and the truth, surprisingly, is enough. Inside, meanwhile, old griefs and shy hopes arrange themselves around the coming vigil. A parent remembers waking them early once before. A friend who moved away texts to ask if the sky is clear. Someone packs a blanket that still holds the scent of another winter. The comet is not the cause of this tenderness. It is the catalyst. It teaches us to inventory our affections and to invest them where they earn interest, in attention offered freely, in experiences shared gently, in memories made without the tax of regret. What then does the near past finally ask of us? Not worship, not fear, not an argument. I think it asks for readiness. Readiness is quiet confidence. Batteries charged, notes printed, coordinates checked, expectations measured, humility worn like a warm hat that covers the ears. Readiness turns chance into gift, and gifts into stories worth repeating because they bless the hearer rather than flatter the teller. Soon the geometry will place us where we need to be, and our part will be to show up. The rest belongs to the sky. It will say what it came to say in the language of faintness, and we will answer in the language of care. And when the page turns softly without tearing, we will carry its texture forward in how we look at everything else. Lights on the highway, frost on a window, a friend's face when they first find the smear and whisper, "I see it." I think that whisper is why we came outside in the first place. It is the proof that looking together makes the world more legible and the heart more spacious and the night more articulate in its gentle speech. I think endings are just beginnings that have learned courtesy, bowing before they leave the room. December's quiet choreography will complete itself, and the traveler will carry on, and we will stay. Yet somehow both motions will feel like one gesture, the way a breath leaving the lungs already contains the promise of the next inhale. If time is a fabric, then this season has embroidered a small constellation of stitches, late alarms, hot mugs in cold hands, the hush, when the faint smear declared itself, the soft laughter shared between strangers who suddenly felt like neighbors. These are the tangible threads of an intangible lesson. That wonder is not a spectacle, but a discipline of attention, and attention is a form of love. But thinking more deeply, love is the only instrument sensitive enough for the universe's quieter notes. It tunes us to faintness without breaking us with longing. It allows us to hold the paradox that the visitor never belonged to us and yet changed us intimately. Love refuses to turn mystery into currency. It turns it into care. Care, in turn, makes a home for meaning. Dark skies protected from careless glare, archives kept honest against the gravity of forgetfulness, language polished until it shines with restraint. When such care persists, departures stop feeling like losses and start feeling like vows renewed. The grand ideas that kept us company, boundary and resilience, rooms and ripples, froth and bubbles, the playful rumor of code, assemble now not as competing flags, but as a single banner. Reality is generous with possibilities, and our task is to meet that generosity with integrity. Whether the first moment was a narrowing or a rebound, the thread that runs through is trustworthiness of instruments, of communities, of hearts. I think this is the secret symmetry. An honest measurement and a kind gesture belong to the same family of acts. Both reduce noise, both clarify signals, both allow truth to become audible without shouting. Entropy will keep doing her soft work. Dust will settle on lenses, stories will blur at the edges. The precise chill of this winter morning will warm into memory's general glow. The answer remains a rhythm, not a victory. Wipe the glass, label the files, retell the story with fewer adjectives and more care. The rhythm is not glamorous, but it is a kind of music ordinary people can keep in step with for a lifetime. And a lifetime lived in step with such music is already a cosmic achievement, whether or not anyone builds a statue to mark it. I think of the cave once more, and how the shadows have grown kinder because we learned to read them. Not all understanding requires floodlights. Sometimes a lantern is enough, sometimes a match brought close to the page returns legibility to letters written in a hand more patient than ours. The comet has been a small lantern. It showed us not only itself but ourselves, how we gather, how we wait, how we share a silence without making it awkward, how we let the world be large without feeling small. So the farewell writes itself in a script the night taught us. Thank you for passing through. Thank you for teaching gentleness to our attention and dignity to our restraint. Thank you for reminding us that nearness is a kind of conversation, and distance is a kind of promise, that what leaves our eyes can still live in our conduct. We will keep the door unlatched, the instruments ready, the words clean. We will teach the children that faint things matter, and we will prove it by noticing them. And when the page turns, as it must, we will not slam the book shut. We will place a finger lightly where the story pauses and look up at the room we share. The friends rubbing warmth back into their hands, the breath misting like little galaxies, the quiet satisfaction of having shown up for something that did not need us but welcomed us anyway. Purpose feels different after a night like this. Not louder, not heavier, but clearer, like a window after rain. If there is a lesson to carry beyond calendars and coordinates, it is simple enough to fit in a pocket. Be ready, be kind, be precise, be astonished, repeat. This loop is a modest engine and it drives a generous life. Under its power, we do not chase greatness, we cultivate goodness, and greatness visits in its own time, usually disguised as a faint smear that requires us to listen better than we did yesterday. In the end, I think departure is a teacher of meaning because it asks us to decide what deserves to remain. Let it be attention, hospitality, honesty, and joy. Let it be a way of walking that leaves room for others on the path and room for silence in the sentence. Let it be a tenderness toward the night that keeps the lights we don't need turned off and the lights we do need trimmed and steady. Then when the next traveler leans into our valley, it will find us already in the doorway, not to claim, not to command, but to welcome, to witness, and to be changed without owning. And that, quietly, is how a small world learns to belong to a vast home.